Anna Miller stood as the sanctuary trembled with phone alerts and gasps when the live stream chat exploded with the word stolen. Lucian Hale said, "Everyone breathe. The accounts are secure," while his eyes tracked the exit. Jordan Reyes said, "Check the transfers now," and a murmur rippled like wind through threads. Grace Whitmore touched Anna's sleeve and whispered calm that felt rehearsed. Eldon Price slid toward the side aisle, thin as a shadow slipping off polished oak. A child cried, and someone prayed too loudly, like a drum under broken glass. Lucian raised a hand and smiled with teeth that never blinked. Anna said, "My mother's savings went to you this morning," and the choir loft fell silent. A deacon killed the projector, and the stained glass turned from fire to bruise. Doors opened to rain and blue lights that soaked the pews in warning. The room tasted of pennies, perfume, and fear. Lucian said, "This is an attack on faith," and thunder answered like a judge. Anna stepped toward the pulpit as if the floor might bite her. The ushers froze between duty and doubt, and the first siren faded into a long inhale. The foyer swelled with voices that tried to sound brave and kept cracking anyway. Anna said, "It was supposed to pay for Mom's surgery," and the room leaned toward her confession like iron to a magnet. Jordan stood between her and the sanctuary as if a body could stop a storm. Lucian remained at the threshold, smiling for anyone who dared meet his eyes. Grace said, "There will be an explanation," and it rolled across the tile like a coin that never lands. A deacon carried a metal box that clinked with envelopes like teeth. Eldon pretended to read a flyer and watched the parking lot through the glass. The rain turned from curtain to mist, and the sirens dulled to a bruise behind the walls. Lucian said, "We will reconcile every line," and the word reconcile felt like a lock clicking. Anna pressed her phone to her ear and listened to hold music that should have been a siren. Jordan said, "Record everything," and the clerk's voice finally said the account was frozen. Grace sighed as if disappointed in gravity. The foyer air smelled like wet wool and panic, and no one knew where to put their hands. Word spread down the hallway like a wire carrying heat. The ager said, "Mom, the chat says it's all fake," and the mother shook her head because shaking felt easier than thinking. Lucian raised his palms and floated promises that never touched the floor. Anna said, "We gave because we believed," and the syllables landed like stones in water, rings widening. Jordan checked timestamps and pointed at transfers that vanished into varnish. Grace said, "We must not let fear divide us," and fear obeyed for a breath, then remembered itself. A janitor folded chairs with the numb grace of a metronome. Eldon said nothing and inventoried exits with his eyes. The donation box rattled in a back room, and someone locked a cabinet 3 times. The rain paused, and a beam of pale light crossed the carpet like a knife that chose not to cut yet. Anna's shoulders squared as if a line finally connected mouth to heart. Lucian drifted close enough to catch the edges of Anna's breath and called her brave in a tone that turned bravery into bait. Anna said, "Show the ledger," and the word ledger felt heavier than the pulpit. Jordan kept his phone up and spoke softer, as if soft words could hide sharp points. Grace said, "The accountants will arrive and manage to sound like tomorrow could solve today." An usher hovered with a clipboard like a shield. Eldon looked smaller than his suit and larger than his guilt. A woman in the corner whispered that her tuition money had wings. Lucian laughed without the part that warms. Anna said, "You looked us in the eye and called it holy," and the ceiling seemed to drop an inch. Jordan named the shell company, and the name hung like a cobweb that suddenly mattered. Somewhere, a hymn started and died after the first line. Foyer lights flickered once, and no one called it a sign. Detective Cole Hart stepped in with rain still dripping from his coat hem, and the foyer made room for the word warrant. Lucian said, "We welcome transparency," and the syllables dressed themselves in silk. Anna's breath steadied, as if the floor had finally admitted it was solid. Jordan said, "Ask about the foundation account," and his voice found a straight road. Grace smiled at the detective, as though courtesy were a key. Eldon coughed into his fist and lost the rhythm of his exit. A printer in the office spat paper like a choked confession. Cole Hart said, "We need records and we need them now," and a deacon moved without waiting for permission. Lucian nodded and offered binders that smelled like cologne and dust. Anna said, "We will see what the numbers pray for," and Jordan almost smiled at the steel in her tone. Rain returned as if it had been listening outside and decided to underline the moment. The foyer lights steadied, and the room remembered how to breathe. Anna sat at her mother's dining table, the wood scarred with years of Sunday meals, and she whispered that trust had always been the easiest gift to give. Jordan said, "That's why he picked this flock," and his words dragged across the room like chains. Grace poured tea with perfect posture, her smile soft, her eyes rehearsed, and she said, "Faith has to bend before it breaks." Lucian's sermon replayed in Anna's mind like a lullaby twisted into a warning. Anna said, "He looked me in the eye and told me it was holy," and her voice cracked where memory cut. Jordan leaned forward, tapping the ledger photocopy as if tapping might bleed truth from the paper. Grace smoothed her skirt and reminded them that doubt could rot faith faster than lies. Anna said, "I don't want to be saved, I want the truth," and silence thickened like syrup. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome, keeping time for their suspicion. Outside, the rain finally gave way to a pale beam of afternoon light, fragile as hope daring to return. Lucian walked among parishioners in the fellowship hall, every handshake a transaction, every smile a performance. He said, "We are a family stronger than storms," and his tone carved loyalty into the air. Eldon stood at the door, silent but watching, his eyes a register of guilt. Anna stood back, arms crossed, studying Lucian as if seeing his mask for the first time. Grace said, "They need reassurance," and her voice carried sugar that didn't dissolve. Jordan whispered, "Count the faces," half of them broke savings for him, and the sound of clinking coffee cups became unbearable. Lucian spread his arms wide, as if he could fold every soul into his jacket. Anna said, "He doesn't hug, he hunts," and Jordan nodded. A hymn started soft in the background, rising not from joy but from desperation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, each flicker a reminder that even electricity resists. Lucian kissed a child on the head, and Anna's stomach dropped. Grace followed Anna into the hallway, her heels tapping like punctuation marks. She said, "You're letting bitterness cloud clarity," and her tone almost maternal. Anna said, "Clarity is watching people lose their homes," and her hand brushed the wall as if steadying herself against the weight. Jordan called after them, "Stay where others can see," but his warning fell flat. Grace stepped closer, lowering her voice, and said, "Faith asks for trust even when logic refuses." Anna met her eyes and said, "Faith is not blind, it's stolen when someone sells lies." Grace blinked once as if caught between two masks, then smiled again. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past, the squeak echoing like a witness. Outside the stained glass windows, dusk shadows crawled across the carpet. The hallway smelled faintly of wax, and silence deepened until it rang in Anna's bones. Lucian stood in his office, blinds drawn tight, desk scattered with envelopes and crisp suits hanging on the rack like soldiers. He said, "They must believe the books are clean," as if the room itself required convincing. Eldon sat across from him, tapping his knees, sweat beading under his thinning hair. Lucian leaned closer and whispered, "Silence is worth more than gold," and Eldon nodded without meeting his eyes. A ledger lay open, red ink smearing across columns like open wounds. Outside, the sound of children rehearsing a hymn floated faintly upward, sharp against the lie-heavy air. Lucian slipped a pen into his jacket pocket and smiled as though contracts had just been signed. The lamp on the desk flickered once, and Eldon flinched as if struck. Lucian said, "The faithful want hope, not numbers," and shut the ledger with a snap. The sound was final, like a gavel. Anna sat in the church courtyard as night spread its cloak, the air heavy with wet leaves and fading rain. Jordan paced nearby, phone glowing against his worried face. Anna said, "I wanted to believe miracles could be bought," and her voice bent under shame. Jordan said, He builds illusions because people crave them, and he kicked at gravel that refused to scatter. Grace approached, her footsteps measured, her expression unreadable. She said, "Every leader is flawed, but faith survives," and her gaze lingered too long. Anna shook her head and said, "Faith survives only if truth survives," her hands folded tight in her lap. A breeze rattled the iron gate, and the sound was colder than the wind. The church bell rang the hour, but it felt like a countdown. The night pressed against them, filled with silence that spoke louder than sermons. Fellowship Hall glowed with folding chairs and promise, and Lucien called it a restoration night. He said, "What was shaken will be made strong," and the room breathed with him. Anna stood near the back and counted envelopes. Jordan said, "Watch the pitch, not the smile," and his phone camera hovered like a second set of eyes. Grace moved through the crowd with gentle nods that stitched people back together. Eldon arranged a sign-up sheet and pretended not to flinch. Lucien raised a brochure and said, "Seed, harvest, overflow," and the words landed like coins. A woman sobbed from relief that sounded like surrender. Anna said, "We need ledgers, not metaphors," yet her voice sounded smaller than she wished. Jordan pointed at a footnote that hid a fee like a thorn. Grace said, "Trust has to start somewhere," and the room agreed for a moment. Lucien clasped his hands and promised audits soon. The hall smelled of coffee and wet coats, and the air hummed with need. Lucien invited Anna to the office and closed the door on the noise. He said, "You carry more than most," and the sentence landed like a hand on a bruise. Anna stared at the ledger copy and steadied her breath. Jordan waited in the hall and texted updates that read like warnings. Grace entered with tea, set it down and said, "Warmth helps hard choices." Lucien smiled and said, "Faith is the courage to step first." Anna said, "Numbers should walk beside courage," and tapped the margin. Lucien leaned in and promised bank letters by morning. Grace added that auditors prefer quiet rooms. Outside, chairs scraped like distant waves. Anna said, "Prove it tonight," and the lamp flickered once as if unsure. Lucien laughed softly and said the printer jammed at the worst times. Grace opened a drawer and produced a polished binder that smelled new. Anna's hands did not move toward it. The hall clock clicked louder than the room. The finance circle met in a classroom that still smelled like crayons and pledge cards. Jordan spread printouts across a child-sized table and said, "Here is the shell." Anna stood beside him and felt the room tilt. Lucien said, "That entity shields transactions during audits," and he made it sound noble. Grace nodded and said, "Temporary vehicles are common." Eldon adjusted his tie and stared at a stain on the carpet. A volunteer treasurer asked if this was normal, and Lucien said yes with velvet ease. Jordan pointed to dates that tripped over each other. Anna said, "Why does hope need a mask?" and the question floated without landing. Grace reminded them of miracles that arrive after patience. A ceiling fan clicked like a metronome built for doubt. Lucien closed a folder and said, "Trust will save you money you would waste on fear." Anna looked at the door and did not move. The stain on the carpet looked like a map. Morning brought a bank lobby that smelled of polished stone and guarded smiles. Anna said, "I need to confirm transfers," and her voice held on like a climber. Jordan showed dates that ran like wires across his screen. Marla Chen said, "We respect privacy and require authorization," and the policy felt like a wall. Anna held the receipt and said, "It is my money and my mother's hope." Lucien arrived with a nod that carried calm like perfume. He said, "We can handle this internally," and the lobby grew softer around him. Grace stood by the brochures and watched reflections. Jordan said, "Transparency solves this in 10 minutes, and the clock above the counter seemed to slow." Marla said, "Requests must follow process," and her pen hovered. Anna's fingers shook, then still. Lucien placed a hand near her shoulder without touching. The marble echoed every breath. Outside, sirens passed without stopping. Night returned with a prayer service built from candles and ache. Lucian said. We light what darkness cannot swallow, and flames wavered like small decisions. Anna stood in the aisle and counted the offering plates moving like tides. Jordan whispered that the shell name reappeared on a flyer footer. Grace led a chorus that climbed and held the note too long. Eldon moved down the side, collecting envelopes with a face that had stopped being a face. Lucian promised a testimony on Sunday that would end every rumor. Anna said, promises multiply when proof cannot, and her words felt heavier than wax. Jordan slid the flyer into his jacket and kept filming hands, not faces. A child asked if light makes lies smaller, and no one answered. The last hymn broke and settled into echoes. Lucian lowered his eyes as if touched by thunder. Anna felt dread, take a seat beside Hope, and refused to leave. The sanctuary doors slammed as papers scattered like startled birds. Jordan shouted, "The shell company traces back to Grace," and the echo cracked the room in half. Anna's breath left her body as if the ceiling dropped. Grace said, "Lies multiply when anger feeds them," her voice honey over glass. Eldon froze mid-step, his hand still gripping an offering plate. Lucian raised his palms and said, "Accusations are daggers, not truth," yet sweat shined on his temple. Anna said, "I trusted you," and the words landed like broken glass on tile. Grace lowered her gaze, but her mouth curved into something too steady. Jordan waved the receipts like a banner of fire. A woman cried, "You told me it was safe," and her husband gripped her arm like a drowning man. Grace whispered, "I only did what was asked," and every candle flame flickered like a warning. Lucian's smile thinned, and the hymnals felt heavier in every hand. The fellowship hall turned courtroom, voices crashing like waves. Jordan said, "Funds routed through her account," and his fingers stabbed the numbers. Grace said, "It was bookkeeping," but her lips trembled. Anna whispered, "Why you?" her tone cutting deeper than anger. Eldon shifted, muttering prayers that did not finish. Lucian leaned in and said, "She served loyalty, not theft," his words weaving silk around fire. Grace snapped, "I did this for us," and the crowd gasped. Anna said, "You betrayed faith for him," and silence burned like ice. A man in the corner whispered, "About mortgages lost." A child asked, "Are we still blessed?" and the question died unanswered. Grace touched her braid, a nervous habit exposed. Jordan slammed the binder shut, and the sound was final as a gavel. The office filled with whispered conspiracies and paper rustle. Grace said, "You promised I'd be shielded," her voice sharp as glass. Lucian said, "Every shield cracks eventually," his tone both warning and dismissal. Anna leaned on the doorframe, her presence a blade. Jordan said, "You both knew," and his eyes burned with proof. Eldon tugged at his collar, sweating under invisible heat. Grace turned to Anna and said, "He made me sign," but her eyes betrayed complicity. Lucian smirked and said, "Faith is leverage," before closing the ledger drawer. Anna said, "You dressed theft in scripture," her fists curling at her sides. Grace said, "I only wanted to belong," and her voice cracked for the first time. Jordan recorded every word as the lamp buzzed. The office felt smaller with every breath, walls closing like fists. The courtyard swelled with storm winds, leaves chasing each other like frightened birds. Anna said, "You stood beside me and lied," her words whipped away but still landed. Grace replied, "I thought loyalty was faith," and her braid came undone. Jordan said, "Truth is the only loyalty that survives," and he stepped between them. Lucian appeared in the doorway, coat over his arm like a king untouchable. He said, "Division is poison, unity is strength," and his smile was cut from stone. Anna said, "Unity without truth is rot," her eyes burning brighter than the lightning. Grace wept but did not deny. Eldon hovered in the doorway, unable to step further. The storm broke fully, rain smearing their faces into raw honesty. Anna's tears mixed with rain, and Jordan's phone stayed steady. Lucian turned back into the church as if walls still obeyed him. The final hymn ended in chaos, not harmony. Lucian stood at the pulpit, voice carrying like thunder. "This is persecution, not justice." Anna rose from the pew, her face carved with grief sharpened to steel. She said, "Justice begins where lies end," and the congregation broke into murmurs. Grace sat crumpled in the front row, her shoulders shaking with sobs that no longer convinced. Jordan raised the receipts high, every eye following the paper trail. Eldon whispered, "Forgive me," as he dropped the plate to the floor, coins scattering like judgment. Lucian slammed his fist on the pulpit, and the cross above him shuddered on its chain. Anna stepped forward, her shoes echoing as if marking time itself. She said, "Your mask is gone," and silence followed like a curtain drop. The storm outside roared, but inside the storm was louder. The storm had ended, but inside the sanctuary, the air still carried thunder. Lucian slammed the ledger shut and said, "This is my ministry, not a courtroom." Anna stood and said, "A ministry built on lies is no sanctuary." Jordan raised his phone, recording every syllable like testimony. Grace clutched her braid and whispered, "I only wanted to belong," but her words vanished into the murmur of the crowd. Eldon whispered, "Forgive me again," his voice softer than coins falling. Lucian's eyes flared with a predator's calm, and he said, "Faith is loyalty, nothing else." Anna said, "Faith is truth," and you strangled it. The congregation stirred, torn between grief and rage. Jordan muttered, "We have proof, and proof speaks louder than prayer." The cross above rattled as though it refused its place above him. Silence grew until the room felt like a throat ready to scream. The air shook with voices until Detective Cole entered, his warrant folder heavy with rain. He said, "The books come with me," and the hall quieted as if justice itself had walked in. Lucian said, "You have no right to tear apart holy work." Anna stepped forward, steady, and said, "Truth needs no permission." Jordan handed over the receipts with shaking hands that steadied once they left him. Grace hid her face, unable to meet the eyes of those she deceived. Eldon reached for the detective's sleeve but withdrew, ashamed. Cole said, "The state will decide what is holy in its own books," his tone sharp as steel. Lucian's jaw tightened as though every muscle plotted resistance. Anna whispered, "At last," and the word carried a lifetime of betrayal. The foyer air grew cold, like the storm outside had returned to watch. In the basement storage room, metal shelves leaned under forgotten hymnals and locked donation boxes. Anna said, "He kept the truth underground," her voice sharp as the scent of mildew. Jordan pried open a drawer and said, "Here's the shell again," pointing to stamped files. Grace trembled in the doorway and said, "I delivered envelopes here when he asked." Eldon collapsed on a folding chair, head in hands, groaning at his silence. Lucian appeared at the stairs, his shadow tall against the concrete wall. He said, "You invade sacred ground with suspicion," but his tone cracked. Anna said, "Sacred ground doesn't hide ledgers in the dark," and Jordan's camera caught it all. Grace leaned against the wall, her tears staining the cinder block. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, dim and uneven, as if ashamed to reveal too much. The basement smelled of rust, and the truth was heavier than the boxes. The confrontation boiled in the fellowship hall where the crowd had gathered again. Lucian shouted, "You think papers can define faith?" his hands raised like a preacher in flames. Anna said, "Faith was never for sale," and the words ripped through the noise. Jordan stepped forward, phone recording like a silent witness. Grace sobbed openly, her braid loose, her composure gone. Eldon stood and said, "I knew and I kept silent," his confession shaking the crowd. Lucian's smile twisted into rage, and he slammed the pulpit so hard the wood cracked. Anna said, "Every crack shows the truth," and the crowd erupted in voices half furious, half heartbroken. The hymnals lay abandoned on the floor, pages torn from restless hands. Outside the storm had calmed, but inside lightning cracked in every eye. The sanctuary climax came when Lucian tried to leave through the side aisle. Anna blocked his path and said, "Not this time." Lucian hissed, "You will regret this," his words venom on stone. Jordan lifted the binder high, his voice steady. The truth walks out, not you. Grace knelt in the aisle, crying into her hands, broken beyond defense. Eldon whispered, "Lord, forgive us all," and his voice trembled with years of guilt. Lucian tried to push forward, but Cole appeared in the doorway, warrant raised. He said, "You walk nowhere but with me," and the sound sealed the air. The congregation gasped, some wept, some applauded. Anna stood like steel forged in fire, her voice steady. The mask has fallen. Lucian froze, his smile gone, his eyes sharp with rage. The sanctuary felt both liberated and wounded, the air too heavy to breathe. The sanctuary was hollow the next morning, pews scattered like bones after battle. Anna whispered, "It feels empty, but maybe that's healing." Jordan said, "Truth always clears space." Grace sat alone near the altar, head bowed, her voice small. "I thought loyalty meant love." Eldon placed the fallen offering plate back on the table, his hands trembling. Lucian was gone, but his shadow clung to the stained glass like soot. Anna touched the wood of the pulpit and said, "Faith is not his anymore." Jordan replied, "Then build something new." Grace wept without restraint, and her tears dripped onto the marble like baptism. Eldon sighed, "I kept silent, and silence cursed us all." Anna looked at him and said, "Silence ends here." The air smelled of wax and wet stone, but there was no thunder, only a tired sun pressing through the colored glass. The foyer carried whispers of decision. Anna said, "We must rebuild with truth, even if numbers are smaller." Jordan adjusted his blazer and said, "Better honest scars than gilded wounds." Grace leaned against the wall, voice fragile. "Can they forgive me?" Eldon muttered, "Confession must be met with repair," his tone weary. Anna said, "Forgiveness is not given, it is earned," and her voice did not waver. Jordan looked at the receipts and said, "We give them to the state, but also to the people." Grace closed her eyes and said, "I will tell them myself." The foyer clock ticked, each second heavy. A child's laughter outside broke the tension, thin but real. Anna whispered, "That sound is what we protect." Jordan smiled faintly, the first since the storm. Eldon pressed his palms together, unsure if it was prayer or shame. In the basement, boxes were opened one by one, each file a scar turned visible. Anna said, "This is the weight of stolen hope." Jordan replied, "We catalog, we restore." Grace stacked envelopes, her fingers trembling, and said, "Every page feels like blood." Eldon dragged a box to the center and muttered, "I carried these for years and never screamed." Anna said, "Now you scream with us in action." Jordan took photos, documenting every file. Grace said, "I don't deserve to touch these papers." And Anna answered, "You must, because you carried them once in silence." The fluorescent hum overhead felt like judgment. Dust rose in streaks as the boxes were split open. Each label whispered another betrayal. The room became a ledger of its own, every breath proof of what had been hidden. The courtyard carried a quieter storm, one of decisions. Anna said, "We return what we can, and we tell the rest." Jordan paced, saying, "Transparency heals faster than silence." Grace stood by the gate, eyes red, and whispered, "What if they never trust me again?" Eldon said, "Perhaps they shouldn't, but truth begins with confession." Anna placed a hand on Grace's shoulder and said, "You face them, not for forgiveness, but for honesty." Jordan looked at the horizon and muttered, "Justice isn't mercy, but it builds tomorrow." Grace nodded slowly, as if each motion was heavier than stone. Eldon leaned against the wall, drained, whispering prayers broken by sighs. The bell above struck noon, its tone sharp but steady. Anna lifted her chin, her voice quiet, "We start today." The sanctuary filled again, smaller crowd, heavier air. Anna stood at the pulpit and said, "We gather not to forget, but to see." Jordan displayed the binder on a table, open for all. Grace stepped forward, trembling, and said, "I betrayed you, I lied for him, and I will spend every breath repairing what I broke." Murmurs rippled, but silence followed. Eldon said, "I too was silent, and silence was betrayal, and his words cracked like stone under weight. Anna said, "We move with truth or not at all," her voice stronger than before. Jordan nodded, his phone down for the first time, not recording but present. Grace's tears fell on the altar rail as if sealing a vow. The stained glass glowed warm with sunlight, no storm outside, only air heavy with choice. The sanctuary sat in stillness, emptied of chaos yet echoing with scars. Anna whispered, "Faith survives when truth is chosen." Jordan said, "The people will remember the lies, but they will also remember who stood." Grace sat apart, her eyes swollen, saying, "I will spend my life repaying this debt." Eldon muttered, "Confession gave me breath again, though shame clung heavy." Sunlight broke through the stained glass, painting the cracked pulpit in colors that once meant hope. Silence lingered, but it no longer felt like fear. The courtyard brimmed with quiet voices, smaller now but steady. Anna said, "We gather not in numbers, but in truth." Jordan handed back envelopes with documented losses, his tone gentle. Grace approached a family she once misled and whispered, "I am sorry," her hands trembling. Eldon said, "Forgiveness may not come, but honesty must stay." The wind carried hymns sung without instruments, only voices. Anna smiled faintly, the first in weeks, as children ran across wet stone. For the first time, the air felt light. In the office, once Lucian's den of control, Anna placed the ledger on the desk. She said, "We keep this open, never hidden again." Jordan replied, "Transparency is our new sermon." Grace stood by the shelves, silent but nodding. Eldon traced the wood grain, whispering, "This place once felt like chains." Anna said, "Now it will be an archive of truth." The blinds were open for the first time, daylight flooding where secrecy once lived. The room smelled of paper and possibility, not fear. The fellowship hall became a place of rebuilding, no banners, no false promises, just folding chairs and shared bread. Anna said, "We start small, but we start right." Jordan recorded testimonies, not for exposure, but memory. Grace poured water for children, silent service instead of speeches. Eldon handed out hymnals with tired but genuine hands. The crowd was smaller, but each face carried determination. Anna looked around and said, "Faith is not spectacle, it is survival." The people nodded, and the air grew warm with unity. Night fell, and Anna lingered alone in the sanctuary, shadows long across the pews. She whispered, "The mask is gone, but scars remain." Jordan's voice echoed from the doorway, "Scars remind us we survived." Grace's quiet footsteps approached, her voice trembling. "I will carry mine forever." Eldon lit a single candle and said, "Light remains, even in ruins." The cross above swayed slightly, no longer chained by lies but steady. Anna looked upward and whispered, "Let this be the last wound we hide." The candle flame flickered, steady against the dark.